Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kelly Timko. I'm from Galorath, and I'll be your moderator for the virtual Lunch and Learn today. Welcome to How to Diagnose a Doomed Proposal, What Not to Do If You Want to Win, featuring Karen McRitchie. We know you're busy, and we appreciate that you're taking time out of your day to learn something new. All of your lines have been placed on mute to avoid any background noise. If you have any questions or you need any help, please use the chat function to speak with me. To find the chat, you can hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen and you can see that appear for you. Today's training is brought to you by Galorath. Galorath is the leader in analytical program management, empowering analysts and organizational leaders to make complex business decisions with confidence through the use of predictive analytics. You can find us on the web at galorath.com. Please stick around for the live Q&A period at the end of this presentation. This will be your opportunity to ask questions and make the session directly relevant to you and your organizational challenges. And we'll also be providing a link in the chat window to a 2-minute post-event evaluation survey. Also at the end of this survey, you'll find a link to be able to get the PDF version of today's PowerPoint deck. And we will also be giving you a free PDF ebook. It's called Bidder's Perspective, Designing and Bidding to Win. It's by Evan Stump, and you're going to want to get that. You don't want to miss that. So please take the time to go in the chat and do the survey and receive those items. On Thursday of next week, we'll be giving away a $100 Amazon gift certificate from the pool of survey respondents. If you're from a government agency and aren't able to accept a gift certificate, we're also happy to donate that amount to the charity to a charity, so in case you're selected. So watch the chat window during the Q&A for that link to the exit survey, and you'll have an opportunity for all these items. Also, if you know of anyone else on your team or in your organization who should be joining us this morning, you can ask them to join right now by sending them to galorath.live. That's GALORATH.LIVE. You'll also be able to sign up for our next training session at galorath.live. It's on December 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific, and it's entitled 9 Common Mistakes Cost Estimators Make and How to Avoid Them, Getting Estimates Right. Today's training is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on demand. We'll send the URL to all registrants by email within 7 days. So if anyone in your organization couldn't make it today, feel free to send them this link when you receive it. Today's presenter is Karen McRitchie, VP of Product Development at Galorath Incorporated. Karen has been with Galorath for 30 years, and she leads all the work related to the SEER product line. She comes from a software development and mathematical modeling background and has worked in all domains of cost estimation. Also, as an advocate for costing professionals, she always is seeking new and innovative methods to improve the state of the cost estimating and analysis practice. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Karen.
Thank you, Kelly. And I'm the one on the right in the picture here, so that's my dad on the left. All right, can I just start off with, what we'll cover, what we'll learn in here, talking about key proposal pitfalls, highlighting the issues that you can have in proposals, and ultimately, help you prepare better proposals. We at Galorath, of course, come from the costing perspective, and we will certainly be discussing issues relating to the costing of proposals as well. So it's comprehensive, but we certainly have a few good angles on the costing aspect of that. Okay, so to start with, I just want to kind of define the term proposals. It's a very broad term. And what we're discussing here are large acquisitions. Oftentimes they're federal contracts, not necessarily though. They could also be business-to-business proposals, and they are usually characterized by the fact that they are time constrained, that there are several rules that govern the process, and you have to follow very specific rules and guidelines, and also that they're in an open bidding an open bidding competitive process. So proposal work is not easy. You're time pressed, you're working under constraints, you're working with a lot of other people. You're trying to sometimes guess at what your competitors are doing and trying to figure out, there's a lot of things that need to come together on it. And so there is a lot of challenges with it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong. Proposals are not like some businesses, especially I'm in Southern California, where winning customers may involve skyboxes at Lakers games. Proposal work is very disciplined, very hard work, very rigorous, and isn't the whining and dining kind of winning business on there. So anyone who's worked a proposal knows it's tough work and requires discipline. And there's just nothing worse than submitting a proposal and knowing that there are issues with it that could potentially sink it. So I want to kind of go in and highlight those. But before I do that, I want to kind of start on an optimistic, brighter note. It takes a measure of optimism for someone to be in business capture. You want to believe in your company's products and services, and you're willing to go out and put yourself out there and do what it takes to win the business. And that's terrific. However, optimism alone isn't enough to go out and win the business. You need to look at a proposal with a very critical eye and be able to spot the issues that are problematic on there. Kind of just a nutshell, prescriptions for a successful bidding. What's a successful bid? You need to have a compliant technical solution as a part of the proposal that doesn't necessarily exceed requirements. So sometimes there's this term, it's got to be a minimal design that satisfies the customers at the lowest possible price. What your customers, you need to understand what your customer is able to pay for this, and also what they value in terms of the product design, and look at it. All proposals are a balance between cost and technical, and the risk is kind of what puts those issues together. So now I'm going to move on to the doom. We had the opportunity to speak with a lot of professionals. We have a lot on our team, both on the proposing side and on the evaluation side. We had them stop and think, what differentiates a good proposal from a bad? And this presentation captures a lot of that information. So what I've done here is organized what some of those themes are, because they kind of fall under certain headings and areas on there. Of course, these can be very intersectional, and you'll notice that as well. But there's always like this constraint between the cost and the technical, and sometimes those issues come on there. So the themes that we'll be talking about are commitment. Is an organization committed to doing what it takes to win the proposal? I'm going to be talking about cost realism, and I've put that under two parts, and I'll expand upon that a little bit later on, but really internal and external costing issues. Errors in proposals, another theme. Errors are, you don't want typos in your essay. You don't want problems on there. So errors seems like a simple thing, but we do want to talk about it. Traceability. The whole discipline of the proposal work is to present a technical solution, and that has to trace back to the customer requirements. And of course, the costing of the technical solution, there has to be traceability on there. So there needs to be a good through line throughout the whole story. I have a topic called solution mismatch, which talks about the issues in terms of what you're proposing. Customer knowledge. How well do you know the customer and understand the customer and what they need and they want? Competitor knowledge. As I mentioned, proposals are a competitive landscape, and understanding what the competitors are doing is important. And then lastly, risk. Risk is, again, there's always uncertainty with all this, and risk is the way to deal with that uncertainty. So first topic, commitment. Commitment is deliberately providing the resources you need to get the job done. And the lack of commitment can lead to a scramble and often not the best of your proposals. One of the key issues that we heard a lot is we got a late start. Once you got a late start on a proposal, it's hard to catch up. It's hard to ultimately get everything done the way it needs to be done. There's issues with boilerplate language, and I put this under commitment because you need the use of boilerplate language is okay, but it needs to be tailored to the proposal at hand. The fact that there may not be an independent cost team to do it, we'll be talking about costing separately, but having an independent cost team is important. Little management engagement. Is this just been put to a proposal team, but if there's not the high level buy-in on there, you won't get the resources needed. Last minute changes. One of the big complaints is this endless rework with proposal, and endless rework can lead to other problems, errors, and not proper explanations on there. So, and of course that reaches back to having a late start. And that's overall disorganizations. If you have different teams, you will have different teams working on different sections. But if there's not a big picture holistic review, they need to be put together with cohesion in there. So overall commitment or lack of a commitment can lead to several issues. The next topic I'm going to talk about is cost realism. First, I'll define it. Cost realism is that the fact that an offeror's proposal is realistic for the work to be performed and reflects an understanding of the requirement. Or in other words, the cost has to make sense. It's got to reflect an understanding of the requirements, the customer requirements, and it has to be consistent with the technical solution being proposed. And proposals are scored on the cost realism on there. So now with that defined, what are some of the issues that could come up with it? Now in the first slide, I have a few slides on cost realism. The first one I talk about is endogenous impacts, or things that are internal to the costing process. And probably one of the biggest issues could be lack of proper analogies or past cost examples used in the proposal. They need to be relevant from a technical perspective, and they need to scale to whatever it is that you're putting. So if the proposal evaluator can't connect the proposed cost with the analogies being presented, the overall score of the proposal will suffer on there. Assumptions on the proposals, your justifications, they need to be realistic. They need to make sense and fit the solution being proposed. Your experience. Some of the problems is if you don't have either relevant experience or the experience is very dated, you can't be too optimistic in the credit that you can take for that experience. And experience is, by stating experience, is sort of a means for saying we're going to, be much more efficient or get something done faster. And then lastly, talk about really vague cost explanations, or BOEs. BOEs is a acronym for basis of estimates, which are the cost explanations for the different costing components in the cost proposal. So BOEs that are too general, that don't give a clear perspective of the basis for the cost being proposed, can be a problem. Related to cost realism is the consideration of heritage. Heritage is really the consideration of an existing system upon which the proposal is based. It could be a big an enhancement to a system, an augmentation to a system, a next generation to a system. And there's always consideration of heritage and how that, will impact the work going forward. So quantifying heritage should be done very carefully, and some issues to take into account. You don't want to take too much credit for similar systems, especially if you can't really substantiate what that is. That makes that hard for the proposal evaluator to validate. Vague adjustments. When you say, yes, we have this existing system and we're just going to adjust it by 20%. There's got to be some elaboration on what that 20% means and what is the basis for that. Things like there are a certain number of things that are more complex, but for A, B, and C reasons, this is going to be adjusted this way. And ultimately, it's going to be difficult to estimate whatever this new technical proposed solution is, to understand kind of what we call the 2B system is, if you don't really have a good reckoning of what the as-is system is. And there's a notion of an incumbent's advantage. If there's an incumbent who built the sort of heritage system, they definitely will have an advantage, and I'll be talking about that a little bit when we talk about competitors' knowledge on there. By the way, I just want to make a little anecdote. When I was a baby estimator and I was dealing with estimates and it talked about heritage and everything, I thought the existing program name was heritage. And it only took me a few estimates to realize that the term heritage is kind of a costing term related to generically what an existing system is. Okay, cost realism, part 2, exogenous impacts or external impacts. So the cost team can turn over perfectly good justifications and basis of estimates, only to be insubordinated by price to win efforts and expectations, where they say, we've got to get this cost down. And so we're going to put all either junior people on or, labor roles that may have a lower rate, but really don't reflect what the, the labor mix that is required to be. So looking at labor mixes, and that's a classic way of adjusting the price on the proposal. But it really has to have some basis in reality to reflect the people who ultimately will be doing the work. Another issue is just adding a large management reserve to mitigate risk. And I'll talk about risk specifically, but just say, there's risk, so we're going to put on a, big chunk of money to deal with that uncertainty. That's not a good approach. And conversely, if there's little or no more margin built in the cost, that can suffer as well. So this is there's some pitfalls of these traditional costing efforts. Management reserve is important, but an objective method for determining how much reserve is needed should be used. Okay, errors, mistakes happen, right? As I mentioned, proposals are a large collaborative effort, and there's just lots of chances to make mistakes. Want to make sure that first and foremost, instructions are followed. Proposals have requirements sometimes on page counts, sometimes on font sizes, what sections need to be included. We want to make sure that all that is followed to a T, and that there is someone overseeing to make sure that those little details are addressed. Inconsistencies, different estimates quoted, and basically numbers that don't make sense between different sections of the proposal. Math errors. You want to make sure that everything adds up, rows add up, columns add up. The numbers and the totals reflect the sum of the pieces on there. And this sounds very straightforward, but errors can happen with copy paste issues, or they can happen in the spreadsheet logic. I say spreadsheet or wherever the cost data is coming from on there. So to make sure that calculations are reviewed and checked. And I would say ultimately the more turnkey the process, the fewer opportunities for introducing math errors. Showing your work, you want to be able to, it seems like an obvious thing, but showing your work can really make or break a proposal, showing how you got a cost and not just putting on a cost on there. And kind of getting back into the commitment aspect when there's last minute changes, that brings in lots of opportunities for introducing some of these errors. Traceability. You don't want to make it difficult for the proposal evaluator to follow things. You want to make sure that there is a map that connects the cost and the technical volume. And having such a map, if you don't have it, or having the map can reveal the inconsistencies, which then can be resolved. If you don't have it, that will lead to inconsistencies or potential inconsistencies that are left unresolved in the proposal. I talked about not showing the work. Obviously, being able to trace how you got your cost numbers are very important. And if it's not provided, ultimately it can make those numbers suspicious. Inconsistencies on there, talking about, if there's, maybe issues, management issues, communication between the teams on there can reveal, if there's inconsistencies, it can reveal potential issues there. Related to not showing your works, partial explanations. You might have a good core basis of estimate, but then if you just provide, some unexplained factor adjustment on there, that can be a problem. Lack of references, BOD, your basis of estimates, your BOEs need to reference the source data, or it could be incomplete and just incomplete assumptions and steps on there. Solution mismatch. This concept speaks to whether the technical solution is aligned with the customer requirements and that the costs in the technical solution are aligned. Exceptions or non-compliance to requirements will hurt your score from the get-go and put you at a disadvantage, especially if you're working in a competitive environment. That can put you at you really have to hope that your competitors have the same non-compliance or exceptions, which is not a gamble you necessarily want to take. The cost and the technical story that describes the heritage or the existing system, or maybe a technology maturation story, needs to be reflected also in the cost story. And what I mean by that is that if the technical solution talks about maturing a technology, the cost story can't say, oh, these are just minor mods to this. That can be a red flag on there. So we want to look at, make sure that you have compliance in the technical solution and that your costing reflects the technical solution. And it's kind of a special case of solution mismatch. I talked about the nail and a hammer. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Proposing what you have is fine as long as it meets the requirements, and recognize that using maybe critical technologies or components could introduce risks in terms of if it's not ready or available in time. That could lead to a single point of failure. So if you're proposing proprietary, a component or technology, if it warrants waivers, you need to really, and even if you explain why it's acceptable, your vision may be what you see as the solution, may be misaligned with what the customer sees, ultimately conflicting goals on there. So make sure that if you are proposing things that it meets the solution or the requirements, I should say. Okay, understanding the landscape. And there's two things here. One has to do with customer knowledge and the other has to do with competition knowledge. Customer knowledge, once you're in an era of, proposal phase, a lot of times connection and communication with the customer can be limited. When possible, getting to know the customer prior to that, taking advantage of industry day events, professional associations to get to know the players is really important. Not knowing what the customer wants or what they're willing to spend can be a problem. Then you're just really guessing on there. So it's like I said, it's difficult when you have limited customer communication. Also, you understanding who the stakeholders are and never assume that you know more than the customer. And then the other one is knowledge or understanding of the competition. And ultimately, this can lead to having the wrong price. Having the wrong price, if everything else is perfect, you've got a great, technical score on your proposal. If your competitor also has a good score and they come in at a lower price, you can lose the proposal. So having the wrong price will kill the proposal, even if it's technically sound. And this is usually a problem when you overprice and your customers come in and undercut it. And it's a tough situation on there. So poor understanding of the competition is understanding the competition is important. I will say there are consulting practices that specialize in helping you out with this. There are in-house practices to do this. In either case, assessing your competitor and what they're doing will help you avoid having that situation where you just end up with the wrong price because they came in and undercut what you had proposed. So the last big theme is risk. Failing to include a realistic risk assessment and of the costs related and those things related to them will signal to the evaluator a lack of understanding or maybe some sort of deficiency in the cost realism. So the baseline costs really do need to capture that uncertainty and risk. And then related to the last slide, in assessing the competitive landscape, if you do not look, if your price to win or your design to cost targets don't take risk into account, you're only working with, you're not really working with the right targets on there. Risk mitigation has several forms. It's not just we will, add a little extra money for this. It could include analysis and simulation to reveal root causes. Risk mitigations could cover sometimes training to improve experience or productivity. Risk mitigations could be, we're going to try to reduce costs, but there's uncertainty because that may not be achieved as well. So you want to have good realistic risk mitigations as part of the proposal. Okay, so to wrap it up and to turn it around, I'm going to talk about proposal success. You can't win every job, but you must win your share, of course, to keep your business. Proposals are big and complicated and they require a lot of work. There's no panacea. Certainly having the right technical solution is important. And I can't, I'm not really in a position to say how you get to the right technical position. Kristen Smart's most recent training session talked about improving mission success and lowering mission cost, and that gives you some hints on there, so you might want to check that out. However, I do have three solutions or approaches to help you. One is to have a good, robust costing process. The other is to integrate your risk analysis. And lastly is to keep an archive. So speaking to the costing process, key points here are automate wherever possible, maintain standard explanations of the general process, because you're going to need to include that, but always have a way of documenting proposal specifics for a particular proposal. And as part of that costing process, historical data needs to be collected. That needs to include both the cost and the technical data. And I won't get into all the details of why that, of going there, but having that is really part and parcel to having that good turnkey costing process. Integrating the risk analysis throughout the process and making it part of the costing process will make sure that you have good risk included in the cost, and that you can, it may not include all the risk mitigations or risk issues, but you will have at least good baseline costs that include the uncertainty on there. And then lastly, maintain an archive of your past proposals, both wins and losses. This is a knowledge base for you to draw upon and provide a post-mortem for what you're doing. Any process is a process that should look at continuously improving. And these three pieces really can be intertwined with one another. They don't, they're not completely standalone, but they will help you in ultimately getting towards a winning proposal process. And like I said, they're kind of symbiotic. If you keep a good archive on there, that can inform future proposal costing, integrating the risk analysis into the costing, make sure that you have that good baseline cost. So that will keep you going on there. So before I turn it over to Q&A, I just want to mention, Kelly had mentioned that is one of the giveaways if you do the survey is a Bid to Win book by Evan Stump. Evan Stump worked for me for about 12 years. He retired in 2016. Sadly, Evan passed away this past spring. He had a very long and storied career. He worked at McDonnell Douglas, he worked at Boeing, he worked at Northrop. He kind of spent the last part of his career at Galorath doing lots of cost modeling and proposal support work for us. And one of his avocations was he was a great writer, and he put together these books. And this is not just a 10-page thing. This is I think it's almost 200 pages, and includes approaches for price to win, best bid models, and things like that. So I want to just kind of give a shout out to Evan, one of the best analysts that I've known, and looking forward to having people kind of enjoy the benefits of his work. So with that, I guess we'll turn it over to the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Karen. Okay, so we have dropped a link to the post-event survey in the chat. So please hover at the bottom of your screen to see the chat window and participate in the survey. Before we dive into the live Q&A session, I want to remind you that the PDF version of today's presentation will also be available at the end of the survey. So go ahead and do that when we're done here. And you'll also be asked for what other future topics you might like to hear, so we can make these sessions more relevant to what you'd like to learn. We won't be using the raise hand feature today, so just submit your questions all through the Q&A button, please. The questions will be viewable to everybody, so you can use the upvote feature That way you can upvote questions that are relevant to you and not have to retype them yourself. With that, we're going to go ahead and open up the Q&A portion of today's live learning session. All right, let's see. So the first question, is using boilerplate language really a bad thing to do?
No, not in and of itself. The only thing that I want to make sure that if you use boilerplate language, and that could be part of a good standard process, that also part of that process is that it is adapted and tuned to the proposal at hand. And the thing you really want to make sure is that it doesn't reference the past proposal that it was used on, or a fill in the blank title here on there. So it's not a bad thing in and of itself. It's just that you want to make sure that it is appropriately adapted to what the proposal at hand.
Okay. Proposals are sometimes page limited, which make it impossible to show your work on how estimates were generated. How would you prioritize what information to include?
Oh, that's a really good question. When possible, look for loopholes. If you can have, addendums or other supporting materials on there, or reference other kind of standard explanations. So you have to, obviously, the technical solution has to, I'm not going to speak specifically to how you prioritize that. That has to cover what it is you're doing and meeting the requirements. As far as costing goes and the limitations on there, you want to make sure that you include a explanation of the costing process, the method, and how you got to that value. And if if there are a lot of steps that go on between that final number in this, you need to at least say, we can't include this all here, but that, that can be provided as ultimate later supporting information, and maybe in more detailed reviews that can be addressed.
How do you account for this potential cost and schedule impact of risks being realized?
Well, you want to look at joint cost and schedule risk assessment on there. I'm not sure I quite get the, you want to look at the probability of the risk happening and what the cost impacts are. I'm not sure I'm quite following can you repeat the question?
Sure. How do you account for the potential cost and schedule impact of risks being realized?
Okay. You want to make sure that they are part of the proposal, that you include them on there, and that you identify what those risks are in the probability of them happening.
Okay. Here's another one. Suppose you are stuck on a late start proposal. Let's say it should be 90 days, but you only have 45. Is there some guidance as to what things might be excluded or less developed so that you can finish without too much insanity?
Well, of course, it's going to depend on the proposal, and there's a lot of particulars on there. But what my best advice is to start with a really good exemplar. And again, as I mentioned, if you have a good archive of proposals, you can draw upon something like that and address it. And it may not be perfect. And there may be reasons for doing proposals where you may not win, but there may be reasons that you want to participate to support that process. So I would say if you're really time pressed and maybe there isn't that commitment on there, is start with the best exemplar that you can and work from there.
Okay. What outputs from Galorath products like C or H have you seen as being most valuable to provide as part of the technical or cost volumes in a proposal?
Oh, yeah, the inputs, and probably the most common thing is to say, when you're costing components, we have the notion of knowledge bases, and that sets up the general characteristics of an estimated item. And then identifying any of the inputs that changed from the knowledge base on there. And you can do that in that can be part of that's part of a report. And you can, for the inputs that you change, provide the annotation, this was changed because of, whatever the substantiation is. And you can have a report based on that. So include the K-bases and inputs that were changed from the K-bases, at least up on the input side. On the output side, I'm not sure if that was a question, but, that you have to look at, what components of the cost if you're looking at development, maintenance, things like that.
Okay, thank you. Sometimes the only resources available to support a proposal are, for lack of a better term, acquisition amateurs that don't know what they don't know because they can't take a college course on government contracting. In that scenario, what are your thoughts on accelerating their path to becoming a proposal writing professional?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Certainly the experience is going to be really key. There's nothing like that actual hands-on experience in doing that. Having a sort of a ability for them to shadow proposals, to get them started might be a great way to sort of fast track them to becoming part of the actual proposal team.
Next question, what is the best way to account for risks in the proposal?
My personal opinion is that you want to, wherever possible, include risks in the baseline costs in terms of making sure that the uncertainties about it related to the technical solution and things like that are part of that baseline cost. Now, there are things that, your kind of basic costing methodologies won't happen or can auto address. Risks like, general market issues will cause unavailability of, people or something like that, in which case that needs to be addressed kind of as a programmatic risk. But where I would say wherever possible is make it part and parcel with the baseline costs or the building them in as part of the BOEs.
Okay. The use of analogies in determining cost was mentioned when talking about cost realism. What about the use of parametric models?
Okay, so the use of analogies, let me just take ICEA recognizes several costing approaches, analogies, bottoms up, build up, actuals, expert opinion. And in that context, analogies are saying, this was the cost of another system and we're using that. Parametric is saying, we're going to build up the cost based on some technical attributes. It might be weight, size, it might be the number of servers or things like that, depending on what it is you're costing. In this context, the analogies, you could be using a parametric approach, but the analogies you might use analogies to drive the inputs, such as the number of functions or source lines of code or weight or number of requirements. So analogy could be driving the inputs to the model, or especially if you're talking on a hardware perspective, you might have an analogous system that is used to help build up the estimation breakdown structure, say for a hardware configuration. So generically, analogies could be used at least as reference points or input data into the parametric model. So it's still, they need to be, again, the same rules. They need to be relevant. They need to make sense from a scalable perspective to the proposal at hand.
Okay, thank you. Also, you didn't say anything about red team reviews. How does that factor?
Yeah, well, red teams are important, and they can pick up on some of the issues that we talked about, but not everything that could doom a proposal. The red team isn't gonna size up the competition for purposes of price to win. A red team, when you're at that point, can't fix a poorly conceived or poorly planned proposal. You've got other reviews, pink and white and things like that. And ultimately having all the different reviews and the different disciplines participate at different phases is important. So the red team is important, and it definitely could help. I guess I was focusing on the end product, the proposal itself, and the red team is a part of that process of getting to the red team. So yes, it does factor in. It's certainly not a panacea. It will fix some things, but not everything.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you. Okay, thank you. I just want to thank you, Karen, for your presentation again, and thank you everybody for attending today. Our next live learning session will be December 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific, and it will be presented by Dr. Christian Smart. You can register for you at galorath.live right now for that. There's also the link in the chat, so don't forget to do the exit survey before you leave our webinar and provide feedback on today's session. You'll be able to suggest topics for the upcoming sessions, download today's presentation. You'll be able to enter to win the $100 Amazon gift card as well, and also receive Evan Stump's ebook. So please take a moment to fill that out. Again, thank you for attending, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.